So we're getting evicted from our apartment here in Tokyo. It is official. Everything has been confirmed and signed. So I just want to update you guys a bit about what happened, especially since it will affect some of the upcoming content on this channel. And we also just want to share this experience in hopes that it will be useful for anyone who might come across a similar situation in Japan, because the way that things are handled here in terms of evictions might not be what you expect, and we actually couldn't find much information in English about navigating this type of thing. So I'm just going to start by giving you guys a bit of background about what happened and then go into specifics about how we handled it and also highlight some tips and considerations that helped us along the way. This is more of a casual sharing about our own experience, so let us know if we missed anything or if you have more questions. And of course, if you have any insights as well, please feel free to share stories or advice in the comments. I'm sure it will be super useful for anyone in need who comes across this video. So we live in a typical apartment building here in Tokyo, or mansion as you would call them in Japan, and we moved in about a year and a half ago. There's been no issues with the building, which is why this eviction really took us by surprise. But thinking back carefully now, I would say that the first sign that something strange might have been happening would be about a month and a half ago when we first got a letter in our mailbox telling us that the ownership and management of this entire building is being transferred over to a new company and that we're to start depositing our rent into a new bank account. So we didn't think much of it. We were just mainly concerned that it might be a scam because it's asking us to put our money somewhere else. But we checked with our friend that lives in the same building as well as a few other units, and we confirmed that the letter was legit. So we just did what we were told and went on with our lives. The letter didn't mention anything else that we had to be concerned about. Then fast forward a couple weeks later, we weren't home at the time, but we saw in our doorbell intercom camera thing that someone in a suit had been ringing our bell a couple of times in the same week, and we thought it was just a persistent salesman. Maybe it's because we're from North America, but we expect that anything important to be done through official mail or email or maybe a phone call, but never just coming right to our door. But turns out in Japan that does happen, and this was the case this time. We got a text from our friend that lives in this building, and he told us that a representative from the new company that owns our building was trying to get in touch with all the different units to say hi, and he wanted to set a time to meet us. And so we were going to meet together with this friend because he knows Japanese and he's happy to help us translate everything. So we just thought, okay, this is probably just them being really polite. They want good business relations with their new tenants. So we're like, okay, it's pretty harmless, simple, just a hello, right? Turns out the reason for the meeting is not what we expected. We bumped into someone that lives in the building and she already had her meeting. So she told us that the real reason is that they're planning to demolish the building and they need everyone to move out. So basically, we're all getting evicted. So at her meeting, they offered to let her stay rent-free until the end of November, which is about 6-7 months worth of free rent, in exchange for her, of course, agreeing to move out by then, also signing an agreement to break her current lease contract. And she did not sign it because she says it's not a strong offer, which is true, and I'll get into that later. But right now, the point is that we were super, super lucky that we bumped into her and found out all of this before our meeting. Otherwise, we would have been definitely caught off guard. Of course, we were a bit shocked and sad to hear that we're being evicted because we recently spent some effort redoing our living room, our entryway. We got new plants and they're doing well. So I mean, yeah, we were a bit sad, but we were also open to negotiation. At least finding this out sooner rather than later means we have time to do our research and prepare for the meeting. With eviction cases like this in Japan, it typically comes down to a negotiation between the tenant and the landlord, which brings us to probably the juiciest and most practical part of this video. So to help us come up with a number in mind in terms of compensation and to negotiate effectively, we had to do some research and figure out how these cases are typically handled and what's usually considered fair. I tried searching online for some resources, but there was actually nothing that I could find that was in English. I did come across a couple of helpful articles in Japanese, which I translated through my browser, and I'll have them linked below, but right now I'm just going to highlight some of the key points from those articles that ended up being the most helpful for us. I prepared a few notes on my laptop. So first of all, when a landlord is the one that wants to break contract and the tenant didn't do anything wrong, the landlord typically has to pay an eviction fee, so compensation, and this compensation can actually be up to 24 months worth of rent depending on the situation. And at the minimum, the compensation should cover at least 3 things. So here's the formula from the site, which I'll have on the screen. between. First, there's the moving fee. So this refers to a moving truck. They estimated it at 130,000 yen, but it can be more or less depending on how far you're moving and how much stuff you have. And then there's brokerage fees, which refers to the commission that you'll have to pay to your real estate agent for helping you move into your new place and do the contracts. And this is typically 1 month's worth of rent. Then what gets interesting is this rent increase, etc. So this comprises of two things. It refers to the upfront fees that you have to pay to your new landlord, which is like key money, a lock exchange, etc. And this can be up to a few months worth of rent. And the second thing that's part of this category is that you should take into account how much more it will cost you now to rent something on the market that is comparable to what you're currently living in. And the reason for this is that in Japan, when you sign a regular rental contract, which is the most common type, it means that you're actually protected from rent increases, and your contract can be renewed for as many times as you want, as long as you pay the renewal fee, which is usually 1 month's worth of rent every 2 years. This is why it's reasonable to be compensated for this if the landlord wants you to break contract and lose that fixed rate and stability. Once you estimate the monthly difference of how much it'll cost you to find something on the market now, you can actually multiply it by 12 to 24 months and then just add it onto the amount of compensation that you ask for. Of course, that last bit is only relevant if you have a regular rental contract. This is in contrast to fixed term contracts, which you'll sometimes see, but they're less common. These ones don't get auto-renewed. It's usually when the landlord only wants to rent their place out for a fixed amount of time, or they want the ability to raise rent after a while. So that's something to pay attention to if you're ever looking for a place to rent here. But for us, we have regular contracts, thank goodness. And it was a huge relief for us to see that the norm here is that the tenants are usually well taken care of. With the range in compensation being so wide though, like from 6 months up to something like 24 months worth of rent, we needed to figure out where we were within that. And the article does bring up something pretty important, which is the legitimacy of the reason for eviction. So this is basically how justified it is for the landlord to kick you out. So examples of strong reasons would be safety reasons, or if the tenant broke some rules or defaulted on rent or something like that. In those cases, the tenant doesn't really have much bargaining power, whereas if it's a weak justification, such as in this case, they just want to demolish the building so that they can redevelop for profit, that's considered a weak justification, and therefore we can negotiate a bit harder. There's also a few other quick points that we thought of that weren't mentioned in the articles. One is that we'll have to take days off work, which is a time cost on our end. So viewing apartments, going to the real estate office to review contracts, and going through the actual move-in process, this is all very time consuming. And two is just generally taking into account the uncertainty and the risk that we're taking on for breaking our contract and having to find a new place. There's always a chance that we might not be able to find a place that meets our criteria within such a fixed time frame. Thirdly, this is kind of like a personal note that we're just keeping in the back of our minds. Well, our current building is in quite a central area and land prices have been going up, so the fact that this big company was able to just swoop in and buy this land probably means that they have the funds to compensate all the units fairly. So with all of this in mind, we thought it would be reasonable and in our best interests to try to negotiate a bit on the higher range. So before going into the meeting, we agreed amongst ourselves that we would not sign anything on the spot and that we would also keep our cool and not show too much emotions no matter what the representative said. So going into the meeting, we got the same base offer as everyone else did, so rent-free until the end of November, which we did not show enthusiasm for. So the rep actually quickly went up to offering that base offer plus 3 months worth of rent and compensation. And then he went up to 6 months worth of rent and compensation. And then he said that any higher than that, he would have to ask for approval, which was fair. And so we just told him that we needed time to think about it anyways, run some numbers, see what's out there. So fast forward a week later, we hop on a call and we let him know that we're looking for 14 months of rent and compensation plus the rent-free period until the end of November. He said he would have to check and get back to us. So he did, and he said, how about 12 months worth of rent plus the rent-free period? And we agreed because honestly, we think it's fair. It will definitely cover our moving expenses plus leave some buffer room in case something unexpected happens. So we ended up signing the contract at the end of last month, but we'd love to know what you guys would have asked for in our situation and if you would have accepted the offer that we ended up accepting. So we have a bit of time before the moving deadline, so we'll probably start off by scoping out a few different neighborhoods just to see where we might want to live next, since based on the listings that we've been seeing, there's a high chance we probably won't find what we're looking for in this same neighborhood. Once we have an idea of a few neighborhoods we like, we're going to keep an eye on the listings in those areas just to get a feel of the rental market. Probably after the summer is when we're going to actually start going to some apartment viewings and just be ready to move as soon as we find a place that meets most of our criteria. And we plan to take you guys along and make more videos about the whole process, like scoping out neighborhoods, viewing apartments, moving in. So if you're interested in all that, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our updates. And just one more quick note, I didn't want this video to become even longer than it already is, but I know that there are some definitions and concepts earlier that I just quickly glossed through. Let me know if you would like a more in-depth video about those concepts like apato versus manshin, fixed contracts, regular contracts, and anything related to housing in Japan. But yeah, that's about it for our current life update. I hope you guys found it interesting and perhaps helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.